It started with a simple text, "I know you're there." It was Christmas Eve, and I just sat down with a glass of whiskey, the fire crackling faintly in the background. I hadn't expected anyone to text me tonight, not after everything that happened. The number was unfamiliar, but the message was chilling. A voice I didn't recognize, a presence I couldn't quite place. It was as though whoever had sent it knew something I didn't. I stared at the message for a few moments before responding. "Who is this?" My fingers trembled slightly. It wasn't like me to get worked up over something so small, but there was something about it, something in the air, in the stillness of the house, that made my skin crawl. I half expected the phone to ring, to hear a voice on the other end, but nothing happened. A few moments passed. Then, another message appeared, one that made my heart stop. "The walls can hear you." The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I dropped the phone onto the table and stood up, my legs shaky. I knew my house well. I knew every creak of the floorboards, every sigh of the old timbers that seemed to groan in the night. But this was something different. There was something, or someone, out there, waiting. I spent the next few hours trying to rationalize it. My phone must have been hacked, or maybe it was a wrong number. That would explain the cryptic messages. But why did they feel so personal? Why did they feel like a warning? I dismissed the thought, trying to enjoy what little peace I had left. It was Christmas, after all. What could possibly be lurking in my home? I turned on the TV and let the low hum of the holiday specials fill the silence. But that nagging feeling didn't leave. It grew, growing louder, pressing against my chest. Every little nose seemed to carry an echo, a strange undertone that made me second-guess what I heard. The wind rattled against the windows, and the clock on the wall ticked steadily, but every so often I thought I heard something else, something soft and deliberate. Then it came, the sound of footsteps, slow, cautious, as though someone was walking across the ceiling above me, the attic. The sound seemed to come from right above my head, the floorboards creaking under the weight of something, or someone, moving around up there. I froze. The hair on my arms prickled. It couldn't be. I had checked the attic just a few days ago, and I was sure no one else had access to the house. I grabbed a flashlight and made my way toward the stairs that led to the attic door. Each step felt heavier than the last, the sound of my own breath becoming louder in the stillness of the house. I reached the door, and my hand lingered on the handle, hesitant, as though something inside was telling me not to open it. But curiosity won out. I turned the knob. The attic was empty. Just a few dusty old boxes stacked against the walls. Nothing unusual. Yet, as I stood there, the air around me seemed to grow colder, as if the house itself was holding its breath. And then I heard it, a soft, whispering sound, a voice clear as day, coming from the far corner of the room. It wasn't mine, it wasn't anyone's I knew, but the words were unmistakable. "I see you." I backed away from the attic door, heart pounding in my chest. The whisper lingered in my mind, as though the words were etched into my very soul. "I see you." The voice had been so soft, so insidious, yet it was unmistakably clear. I didn't dare stay any longer. I shut the door quickly and locked it behind me, as though locking away the very sound that had gripped me. But the feeling didn't fade. It grew worse with each passing hour. Every time I tried to sit down, I heard it again. The faintest creak of floorboards above me, the whispering, the soft, dragging sound of something being moved. I tried to ignore it, to drown it out with music or TV, but it was always there, lurking just beyond the edges of my awareness. The days that followed only made things worse. The whispers didn't stop. I began to hear them even when I wasn't alone. The TV would flicker and turn off by itself, only to come back on moments later, broadcasting static before a strange voice would cut through the fuzz. Sometimes it sounded like a child crying, or a low, guttural growl. I couldn't sleep, I couldn't eat, I began to lose track of time, each day blending into the next. But what unsettled me most wasn't the sounds or the eerie presence in the house. It was the feeling of being watched constantly. It was as if there were eyes on me, following my every move. I started researching the history of the house, trying to make sense of what was happening. One found a few old articles about the previous owner, a man who had lived here alone for years. No family, no visitors, just him and the house. One day he simply vanished. The police had never found a trace of him. The only thing that had been left behind was a note, scribbled in his own hand. The walls are listening. The connection hit me like a cold wave. That same feeling I had, that the house was alive, that something was inside it with me. It was the same as the man's. He had known something, and now I was feeling it too. The whispers were more than just a voice, they were a warning. I knew I had to leave, but I couldn't. No matter how hard I tried to shake the feeling, to make sense of it, it felt like the house had a hold on me, as though it would never let me go. That night, the whispers reached a crescendo. They were louder, clearer than ever before. And then the door to the attic creaked open on its own. I stood frozen at the foot of the stairs, staring up at the attic door, which was now ajar. The whispers were no longer soft. They were harsh, frantic, echoing in my head with every beat of my heart. "I see you," the voice repeated, but now it was joined by others, layers upon layers of voices, all calling my name. It was as if the house itself was alive, breathing, suffocating me with its oppressive presence. I could no longer deny it. The house wasn't haunted by just the previous tenant. It had been waiting for him, waiting for someone to come back, someone who could hear it, feel it, someone like me. I forced myself to climb the stairs. Every step felt heavier, as though I was moving through molasses. The air grew colder the closer I got to the attic. My breath fogged in front of me, and the whispering grew louder, turning into an almost maddening cacophony. When I reached the top, I hesitated, looking at the door that was now wide open, an invitation into the darkness. With a deep breath, I stepped into the attic, my flashlight trembling in my hand. The beam flickered, illuminating nothing but the old, dust-covered furniture that lined the walls. But in the corner, something moved, a shadow, too large to be just an object. It shifted, its form growing clearer with each passing second. And then I saw it, a figure, pale and gaunt, with empty eyes staring back at me from the darkness. It was the man, the previous owner, but there was something wrong. He was still here, trapped. And now I understood. The walls didn't just listen, they kept what they heard. I tried to back away, but the figure moved closer, its eyes never leaving mine. The air around me seemed to thicken, pressing against my chest as though the very house itself was trying to suffocate me. I opened my mouth to scream, but no sound came out. The whispers filled my mind, drowning out everything else. "You'll never leave," they whispered in unison. Suddenly, the figure lunged forward, but instead of crashing into me, it passed right through. A cold wave of air swept over me, and I stumbled backward, almost falling down the attic stairs. The whispering stopped. The house went silent. I don't know how long I stayed there, trapped in that moment, but when I finally gathered the strength to leave the attic, I locked the door behind me. I ran out of the house, without looking back, the feeling of being watched never leaving my skin. The house is still there, standing silent in the distance, waiting. I can't shake the feeling that it's still calling me, still waiting for me to come back. But I know one thing for sure. The walls aren't listening anymore, they're watching. It started innocently enough. Christmas night, snow falling softly outside, and a kind of peaceful silence that only the holidays could bring. I was alone, sitting on the couch with a glass of whiskey in my hand, the flicker of the fireplace casting shadows on the walls. It was the first time in years that I had a moment to myself. No family, no obligations. Just me and the cold winter night. Then I heard it. At first, it was faint, almost like a memory drifting in and out of the wind. The sound of carollers, soft voices singing Silent Night, their harmonies drifting through the air. It was beautiful, and for a moment, I let myself relax. I closed my eyes, letting the sound wash over me, feeling the warmth of the fire and the festive cheer. But when I opened my eyes, something was wrong. The voices weren't coming from outside my window, they were coming from the hallway. My heart skipped a beat as I set my glass down, my skin prickling. I got up, walking slowly toward the front door. I opened it, expecting to see the usual group of merry carollers. But the porch was empty. No one was there. Yet the singing continued, louder now, as if they were right outside my door. I slammed the door shut, my breath quickening. My heart was racing, but I tried to calm myself. Maybe it was a trick of the wind or a neighbor playing a prank. But then the sound came again, this time more sinister, more deliberate. The melody was still Silent Night, but it had changed, twisted, even. And that was when I realized the voices weren't singing for joy, they were singing for something else. The carollers' song grew louder, more insistent, as though they were right outside the walls of my house. I stood frozen in place, my hand gripping the door handle. The faint, cold draft of the winter night seeped through the cracks, but the air inside the house felt heavier, as if something was pressing down on me. I glanced around the room, as though expecting to find some rational explanation. A speaker hidden somewhere, a forgotten radio station playing in the distance. But nothing made sense. There were no lights outside, no shadows in the window. The street was empty, yet the singing persisted. It was no longer the sweet melody of Silent Night. The voices had changed, deepened, twisting the familiar hymn into something unrecognizable. The higher-pitched voices were joined by a low, guttural tone that hummed in my chest, making my skin crawl. I stepped back from the door, heart pounding. My fingers were numb, but I forced myself to turn away from the entrance. I went to the living room and stared at the fireplace, trying to ground myself, but the singing had followed me, echoing through the walls, ringing in my ears. It was as though the house itself was alive, pulsing with the rhythm of their voices. My eyes scanned the room, and that's when I noticed it, the reflection. It was faint at first, but in the dim light of the fire, I saw them, shadows moving across the wall, mimicking the shape of people. At first I thought I was imagining things, but the shadows moved on their own, twisting and jerking in unnatural ways. I turned quickly, but the living room was empty. The song, however, remained as if it were inside my very bones, vibrating through the house. Silent Night, they sang, but it wasn't peaceful anymore. It was threatening. Suddenly, the front door banged open. I didn't remember unlocking it, but there it was, swinging wide, an invitation to whatever waited outside. The singing stopped. The silence was worse. I couldn't bring myself to move. The door stood wide open, inviting the cold night air inside. The silence was suffocating, almost as if the house itself was holding its breath. My heart pounded in my chest, and for a brief moment I considered closing the door and pretending none of this had happened. But deep down I knew something was terribly wrong. The carollers weren't just singing, they were waiting. I stepped forward, my feet unsteady, and closed the door behind me. The lock clicked with an unnerving finality. I turned around, hoping to find something, anything that could explain this madness, but all I saw was the empty hallway stretching before me like a tunnel into nothingness. Then the whispers started. It wasn't the cheerful carollers anymore. It was a voice, low and distorted, almost like a growl. "Let us in," it whispered over and over again, growing louder with each repetition. I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up as the voice seemed to come from all directions. The walls, the floor, the very air around me, everything felt wrong. I couldn't escape the feeling that something was pushing in from the outside, closing in on me. I ran to the living room, trying to shake off the growing sense of panic, but as I reached the doorway I froze. There, in the dim light, stood the carollers. At least they looked like carollers. Their figures were hazy, their faces obscured by shadows. They were standing perfectly still, as if waiting for something. The air around them seemed thick, pulsating with a strange, dark energy. The one at the front turned to me, its eyes glowing with an eerie, unnatural light, its mouth open. But instead of a song, a scream poured out, a high-pitched wail that shattered the stillness of the room. The sound was so loud, so jarring, it made my teeth rattle in my skull. I stumbled back, my breath caught in my throat. My vision blurred as the Carollers stepped forward, one by one, their movements jerky and unnatural, like marionettes pulled by unseen strings. I backed away from them, but the hallway seemed to stretch impossibly long, the shadows bending in on me, as though the house itself was alive, reaching out to consume me. The singing started again, but this time it wasn't just the song. It was the sound of footsteps, faint and uneven, moving closer, coming from the walls themselves. I turned to run, but the front door had vanished. In its place was a thick, black fog, swirling and closing in like a living thing. The Carollers' voices swirled around me, their haunting melody twisting into something monstrous. "Let us in," they sang. "You're one of us now." The air was thick with the sound of their song, but it had changed again, now twisted mockery of the holiday cheer it once represented. The Carollers circled around me, their faces still obscured by shadow, but their eyes, those glowing, unnatural eyes, burned with an otherworldly hunger. I could feel their gaze pressing in on me, suffocating me. I tried to move, but my legs felt like lead. The thick fog around me seemed to cling to my skin, as though it were alive. The walls themselves were pulsing, undulating, like the heartbeat of the house. Each beat brought the Carollers closer, their movements jerky and unnatural, as if they were trapped in a perpetual loop, a nightmare that could never end. One of them reached out a hand, its fingers long and thin, stretching impossibly toward me. As it touched my skin, a cold, searing pain shot through my body, like ice was coursing through my veins. I screamed, but no sound came out. My mouth was dry, and my chest felt like it was being crushed under the weight of their presence. They stopped singing for a moment, their faces now inches from mine. The Caroller in front of me leaned forward, and with a voice that was more growl than song, whispered, "You should have never opened the door." The words hung in the air like poison, and then, in an instant, the song returned, louder and more frantic than before. The Carollers closed in, their song a cacophony of voices, and I knew then that there was no escape. The house, the Carollers, they were all part of a trap, and I was the prey. The song reached a deafening crescendo, and with it came a terrible, suffocating pressure. It was as though the very walls of the house were collapsing in on me, the floor beneath my feet shifting, warping. My mind spun as the Carollers' faces grew clearer, their features twisted in grotesque smiles, eyes burning with hunger. I stumbled backward, gasping for air, but there was no escape. The fog swallowed me whole, and I felt my body being pulled forward, my limbs no longer my own. The Carollers closed in, their voices melding into a nightmarish symphony. Then, everything stopped. The house was silent, the Carollers were gone, and the fog that had once surrounded me lifted, leaving me standing in the empty living room. My breath came in ragged gasps, and my heart hammered in my chest. But something was wrong. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was heavy, suffocating, like the calm before a storm. I turned to the window. The street outside was quite empty, but in the reflection of the glass I saw them, the Carollers, standing in the yard, their eyes glowing, waiting. I knew then that they would never leave, and neither would I. If this story gave you chills and you want more like it, click the video on the screen. Don't forget to leave a comment, subscribe to the channel, and share with your friends, because the terror never stops, and you won't want to miss the next nightmare.